Hey guys, tonight we're cracking open something a little different. You're not exploring a battlefield or trailing a famous ruler, nope. Tonight, you ease open an old mahogany drawer, smooth as velvet in your imagination, and peer into the quiet clutter of a Victorian nightstand. Dust motes float like lazy fireflies in lamplight, and you, curious, slightly snoopy, perhaps still in your socks, start picking through the mysterious bedtime treasures that once lay just an arm's reach from sleep. We're talking frilly, lacy, lavender-scented history. You probably won't survive this. Not because it's dangerous, but because the temptation to fall asleep halfway through a sentence is real. If you've ever wondered how someone in 1875 might have prepared for a decent night's rest, you're in for a strangely soothing trip into scented sachets, patent medicines, and a drawer that feels like a diary no one meant to write. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And drop a comment with your location and local time. I love knowing where and when you're drifting off. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Your fingers brush the cool brass of the drawer pull. The handle clicks, and with a quiet tug, the drawer rolls out, smooth and slow. No dramatic creak, just a sound like an exhale. Inside, chaos, of a distinctly polite and perfumed sort. A lace-trimmed handkerchief lies folded like a napkin atop a half-used cake of rose-scented soap, its edges crumbling into time. A stub of beeswax candle rests in a chipped porcelain holder shaped like a daisy. A tin of soothing salve for the throat and temple, still faintly minty if you dare imagine opening it. And tucked in the back, a silk pouch tied with blue ribbon, containing who knows, perhaps a broken locket, or powdered lavender, or a very old peppermint. This is the Victorian sleep drawer, its own peculiar landscape of habits, anxieties, and comfort rituals. The kind of drawer someone opened and closed hundreds of times in the dark, without ever thinking it would matter. Victorians loved their rituals. Morning ablutions, morning attire, midday tea, all clocked with an almost religious precision. Bedtime was no exception. For women especially, who were expected to manage the household's moral and physical health, the nightstand drawer became a personal command center. Equal parts apothecary, vanity kit, spiritual toolbox, and secret keeper. The drawer itself might be part of a washstand, or the low night table by a narrow feather bed. Mahogany if you had means. Pine if you didn't. But either way, it would be cluttered, because if modern nightstands hold phone chargers and lip balm, imagine what you'd store if your phone was a letter opener and your sleep app was a leather-bound book of prayers for weary souls. You shift a few things around. Beneath a folded linen napkin, there's a bone-handled button-hook, likely for shoes or gloves, but who's to say it didn't double as a midnight back-scratcher? A tiny ceramic cat with a chipped ear blinks up at you, one of those inexplicable keepsakes that defy reason. And, tucked near the back, a penny dated 1843, saved perhaps for luck or for the memory of a moment that faded long ago. Here's your historical fact of the night. Personal drawers were rarely private. Even intimate items were considered fair game for domestic staff, family members, or nosy houseguests. Which makes the inclusion of personal notes or charms all the more fascinating. Victorian culture, at least in middle and upper-class households, was layered with contradiction. Publicly reserved, yet privately sentimental. Technologically ambitious, yet obsessed with superstition and dreams. They invented the telegraph and also believed that spirits could be summoned through table rapping and dream interpretation. So of course a drawer meant for sleep might also include a feather from a lucky goose, or a worn ribbon passed down from a mother's wedding bonnet. Historians still argue whether such objects were intended for practical use, spiritual comfort, or emotional nostalgia, but maybe that's the point. The drawer held all of it. There's something sweet about how clutter tells the truth. Clean surfaces lie. A pristine nightstand suggests control. But a drawer like this, it whispers. You learn that someone nibbled licorice drops while rereading Pilgrim's Progress, and that they were maybe a little obsessed with tooth hygiene, judging by the 4 different kinds of powders tucked in beside a bristle brush wrapped in old cotton. You catch the faintest whiff of bergamot oil, the scent clinging to a handkerchief corner as though it still remembers the hand that once pressed it to a temple. Of course, you could close the drawer. But that would end the story too early, and we both know you're not quite sleepy enough for that yet. Instead, you reach farther back, feeling the slightly sticky residue of spilled elixir dried into the wood. There's a brass key with no known purpose. And what looks like a scrap of silk ribbon once blue, now faded to ghost gray. So yes, the drawer is a mess. But it's the kind of mess that's organized by memory more than logic. Like sleep itself, part order, part dream, and entirely human. And tucked under a velvet pouch, you find a miniature paper fan, folded flat. Why keep it there? Maybe for summer nights when the bedroom window wouldn't open, or when fanning away a headache was the only cure before aspirin came to town. Or maybe it was just pretty. And here's your fringe tidbit. Some Victorian households placed small bells inside bedside drawers, not for servants, but to scare off spirits. A jingling drawer was thought to ward away bad dreams. Honestly, kind of wish that trend would come back. You pause, your finger still resting on the edge of a pressed flower, maybe a pansy, dried into parchment. It's delicate, brittle, and likely older than anyone alive today. That's the magic of the drawer. You're not just sifting through objects. You're sorting through someone's sleep. You pick up the pressed pansy ever so gently, its petals wafer-thin and veined like a forgotten map. Maybe it was placed between the pages of a devotional, or tucked inside a love letter never sent. In the soft gloom of a Victorian bedroom, a flower like this wasn't just a flower. It was a souvenir from a walk, a token from a grave visit, or a symbol of quiet devotion, pressed, preserved, and then tucked away where the fingers could find it on nights when the mind wandered too far. The drawer gives more, because of course it does. You shift aside a square of delicate lace, revealing a small glass vial. It's corked and cloudy. A faint, herbal scent clings to its rim, something between mint and chamomile, though you can't quite place it. The label has faded, but the words "restorative draft" can just be made out in swirling script. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Victorian sleep remedies were, frankly, a pharmacist's playground. This was the era of laudanum, chloral hydrate, bromides, potent concoctions sold over the counter with names like Mrs. Winslow's Soothing Syrup and Bateman's Pectoral Drops. Many of them were laced with alcohol, morphine, or opiates. They were often taken with a shrug and a spoon, especially by women suffering from what the era daintily called nervous exhaustion. But not all remedies were chemical. Herbal teas, scent pouches, and calming rituals played just as large a role. You notice a packet of dried lemon balm folded into linen, used for centuries to ease anxiety. There's a soft smudged note tucked beside it, brew 2 leaves for sleep, 3 for dreams. Whether the note was written earnestly or with a wink, you can't quite tell. Victorians lived in a world of quiet dualities. Science and superstition were not enemies, they were next-door neighbors. You might dose yourself with ether and also put your faith in a pressed sprig of rosemary under your pillow. Historians still argue whether this blend of faith and pharmacology reflects desperation or a deeper sense of balance between body and spirit. But you can imagine someone, wrapped in a shawl and lit by candlelight, pouring boiling water over herbs and whispering a half-prayer, half-yawn. Another item rests in a small wooden compartment at the back of the drawer, a tiny book, barely bigger than a matchbox. The cover is cracked leather, the title pressed in fading gold, Evening Reflections. Inside are handwritten notes, quotations, maybe a few copied poems. One passage reads, "The day departs, as must we all. Sleep, the gentler cousin of death, take me softly." Bit dramatic, but typical for the period. Victorians were not shy about acknowledging mortality at bedtime. Death was present in their lives in ways that are hard for modern minds to grasp. Infant mortality, cholera outbreaks, and consumption loomed in everyday conversation. A good night's sleep wasn't just rest, it was a minor miracle. The drawer seems to agree. Beneath the booklet, you find a smooth black stone carved with a small cross. A personal keepsake or a religious charm? Hard to say. You imagine it was held in a palm during a fever or placed near the pillow during thunder. Maybe it was simply comforting to hold something cool and real in the hand while drifting into the unknown. As your fingers explore further, they close around something odd, a small, lumpy pouch, tied shut with a fraying string. It gives a soft rattle when moved. You open it slowly, carefully, to find a mix of dried beans, cracked nutshells, and a single silver button. This, dear listener, is what the Victorians might have called a dream charm. Whether to invite good dreams or trap bad ones, no one really agrees. Some claimed the noise of the pouch unsettled spirits. Others said the button was a decoy for fairies. Give them something shiny and they'll leave your dreams alone. Historians still debate whether these pouches were rooted in folklore, repurposed child toys, or merely the equivalent of fidget trinkets, but their presence in more than a few collections suggests something deeper. It's charming, in its way, how much effort was put into preparing for sleep. In modern times, we throw back a melatonin gummy and doom scroll until our eyes blur. The Victorians? They arranged their defenses like a general preparing for battle. Herbal sachets, oil drops, devotionals, sleep stones, bells, Bibles. Sometimes even a photograph of a deceased loved one tucked beneath the drawer liner. You don't find one of those in this drawer, yet, but your fingers do land on something metallic. A pair of wire-rimmed spectacles, arms slightly bent, lenses smudged and fogged with age. Set aside for the night, likely after reading a page or two of Psalms or the latest installment from Dickens in Household Words. Sleep wasn't just a break, it was a soft curtain pulled between chapters. And speaking of Dickens, did you know he reportedly insisted on sleeping facing north to align his body magnetically with the earth? That's your fringe tidbit for this section. He even traveled with a compass to ensure proper bed placement. Now imagine your 3 a.m. self flipping a hotel mattress because it's 2 degrees off true north. Sounds ridiculous, but also kind of admirable. You shift the glasses aside and find what might be your favorite item yet, a tin of slumber powder, still sealed. Instructions, to be sprinkled upon one's pillow for dreamless repose. Its scent, probably something between talc, violets, and the vague hope of uninterrupted rest. This drawer doesn't scream with drama. It hums. It's a chorus of whispers, exhalations, and everyday worry. Every item is a line in a poem that was never meant to be written, a sleep ritual quietly shared across time. You place everything back gently, but the scent of lavender lingers in your mind. Or is that just the idea of it? The next layer of the drawer creaks as you slide aside a stiff square of starched linen, the kind that's been carefully folded by someone who truly believed in corners. Beneath it, nestled like a secret, is a pale blue envelope with the words, "Do not burn," written in tight, upright script. You pause. Whatever's inside, someone wanted it preserved, saved from the fire, which, in Victorian times, was where many things went to disappear. You unseal the flap. Inside, surprisingly intact, are several pages of correspondence, not addressed to a person, but to sleep itself. "Dear Sleep," one begins. "You were kind last Thursday, and cruel every night since." Okay. This wasn't unusual. The Victorians, forever poetic, often personified sleep like a fickle lover or distant friend. You're holding what might be considered a midnight diary, or perhaps a set of offerings, pages written more in ritual than in expectation of reply. Some are wistful. Some are pleading. One simply says, "Return what you stole, and I'll stop blaming the wind." Whatever that means. Here's your mainstream fact. Insomnia was no small concern in Victorian times. Despite the absence of glowing screens or 24-hour distractions, people then suffered just as acutely from sleeplessness as we do now. In fact, the rapid pace of industrialization, constant exposure to coal smoke, noise from night trains, and the psychological toll of Victorian social rigidity all contributed to restless nights. Manuals on managing sleeplessness, some spiritual, some strictly medicinal, were common. One such manual, you recall, advised avoiding pickles at dinner and instead listening to the ticking of a small clock in complete darkness. Because nothing says relaxation like a metronome of your own mortality. Tucked between the pages is another fringe delight, a sliver of beeswax shaped into a tiny reclining figure, most likely a home-molded charm or a plaything. Could this have been melted slowly beside the bed, like a waxen offering to Morpheus? Possibly. Or perhaps it was meant to trap nightmares in its folds before hardening at dawn. Historians still argue whether such wax figures were mere novelties or if they held legitimate folkloric roles in working-class bedrooms. Regardless, there's something eerily tender about its rounded face, worn smooth from handling. Next to the envelope is a much firmer object, a wooden disc, polished and warm to the touch. It's etched with 12 evenly spaced dots and a single arrow carved into its center. It's a sleep compass, or at least, that's what the seller would have called it. The arrow was meant to be pointed toward a chosen direction, often east or north, under the belief that sleeping in harmony with celestial lines would ease troubled minds. It's like feng shui meets medieval navigation, except you're supposed to do it while unconscious. You spin the disc absent-mindedly and it lands pointing west. Interpret that however you'd like. Shoved into the back corner of the drawer, nearly invisible, you spot a stiff, folded fabric with a satin edge. A sleep cap, thin, hand-stitched, slightly frayed along the ties. This one's obviously been worn. You imagine it gently tied beneath a chin, maybe worn by someone elderly, maybe someone simply trying to keep the night chills off. The Victorians had no central heating, remember. Drafts were part of life, and sleepwear was more armor than fashion. Quick reminder, this was also the time of bedroom layers. People didn't just throw on pajamas. They wore shifts, chemises, even woolen socks with leather soles. You might find yourself wrapped tighter than a Christmas roast, just to make it to morning without frostbitten toes. And just when you think the drawer is done surprising you, your hand brushes a curious item, a thin metal plate engraved with tiny dots and dashes. Braille. You hold it up, and it becomes clear. It's a bedtime prayer, intended for the visually impaired. It reads, roughly, "Light of the night, still my bones, hush the hours till morning comes." Beautiful. Sparse. Functional. This brings us to a tender truth. Victorian disability aids were often handmade, deeply personal, and quietly integrated into daily rituals. A blind person's drawer, for example, might be labeled with hand-stitched thread knots. A deaf person might have kept an ear trumpet near their pillow, not just to hear better, but to feel connected to the hum of nighttime life. And here's where historians still debate. Did Victorians design such accommodations out of compassion or merely practicality? Did inclusion stem from empathy, or was it a byproduct of the era's obsession with cataloging, organizing, and controlling every facet of domestic life? No neat answer. But this tiny prayer plate seems to whisper something soft and dignified. Tucked beside it is a cracked porcelain button, bigger than usual, and painted with a single red flower. Unremarkable, until you spot the hair. Yes, hair. Woven tightly into a loop and sealed under glaze. It's a mourning token. Victorians often incorporated human hair into jewelry, artwork, and even furniture trimmings. And yes, into buttons. If you're feeling a bit uneasy, you're not alone. But to the Victorian mind, this wasn't morbid, it was respectful. Hair didn't decay like flesh, it was considered the purest, most enduring relic of a person. Including it in sleepwear, or even within a nightstand drawer, was an act of remembrance. A way to keep someone close, long after they'd gone cold. You place the button gently back, suddenly aware of how full this small drawer really is. Not in volume, necessarily, but in emotion. Every object has weight, not just in grams, but in longing, in comfort, in the tireless hope that rest will come. And when it doesn't, at least you have a drawer full of reminders that it used to. You reach further in, the scent of old lavender still clinging faintly to the wood, and your fingertips graze something unexpectedly soft. You tug gently and lift it out, a worn, velvet pouch, barely the size of your palm, cinched with a thin, frayed cord. Inside, muffled and muff-like, is the unmistakable clink of small glass. You loosen the tie and tilt the contents into your hand. 3 miniature vials, each stoppered with cork and carefully labeled in faded ink, Sleepy Drops, Night Cordial, and simply V. This is Victorian bedside pharmacology at its most charming, and most quietly chaotic. Mainstream fact first, the Victorians adored their patent medicines. Unregulated and widely available, these elixirs promised sleep, vitality, calm nerves, and regular digestion, often all at once. What they actually delivered was a mystery. The ingredients list, if it existed, was more suggestion than science. Opium. Often. Alcohol. Nearly always. Belladonna, chloroform, cannabis, and even mercury. Absolutely possible. You hold up the vial labeled Sleepy Drops, squinting to see if any sediment clings to the bottom. There's a hint of amber sludge. A whiff reveals something sharp, vaguely citrusy, maybe lemon balm? Or maybe the ghost of laudanum past. Hard to say. The fringe tidbit here. One of the era's most popular sleep remedies was called Godfrey's Cordial, a blend of opium and molasses often given to teething infants. Infants. The stuff knocked them out for hours, sometimes days. It was also responsible for an unfortunate number of crib deaths, but as long as the child wasn't crying, Victorian parenting manuals gave it a thumbs up. Soothing syrups were everywhere, marketed with cherubs on the label and the comforting lie of herbal safety. Historians still argue whether these cures were acts of desperation, clever placebos, or thinly veiled means of sedation in overcrowded, overworked homes. Maybe all three. Maybe none. One thing certain, Victorian households, especially those without servants, rarely had the luxury of a full night's rest. Children, illness, and street noise didn't pause for etiquette. And speaking of etiquette, folded beneath the pouch is a creased instruction leaflet titled, "How a Lady May Sleep Peacefully Without Disarranging Her Hair." That's right. Victorian women were expected to maintain hairstyles that could survive multiple days, sometimes even weeks, without washing. Complex braids, pinned curls, and ringlets sculpted into rigid architecture. Nightcaps weren't just for warmth. They were scaffolding protection. You scan the leaflet. It recommends wrapping the head in a light veil, sleeping only on one's back, and, this is real, repinning any rebellious strands mid-slumber. As if sleep were a polite agreement rather than a bodily necessity. You picture someone half asleep in a frilly cotton chemise, groping for hairpins in the dark. Restful? Not exactly. But fashion demanded sacrifices. Often vertical ones. Folded into this same layer is a paper-wrapped bundle labeled bed garnitures. Inside are two strange papery pads stitched with what looks like dried petals. Lavender, yes, but also valerian root and possibly rose. These were to be placed under one's pillow, thought to ward off nightmares or, at the very least, induce sweeter dreams. The smell is earthy and slightly medicinal, like an apothecary's hug. And now comes something wholly unexpected, a small square of polished slate, about the size of a coaster, with a single sentence scrawled across it in white chalk, "Do not forget to breathe out slowly." A note to self? A meditation cue? Hard to know. But what's charming is that it's erasable, reusable. A perpetual reminder that stillness is a skill. Even if you live in a city with horse-drawn taxis clattering past your window and neighbors emptying chamber pots before sunrise. Next to the slate is a single glove. Not a pair. Just one. Satin, ivory-colored, with a small brownish stain on the palm. Before you get all dramatic about it, it's probably tea. Or ink. Or 100 other domestic spills. The solo glove invites speculation. Was it forgotten after a night out? Was it kept intentionally? Gloves were intimate items in the Victorian world. Removing one in public was almost flirtatious. A single glove left on a dressing table might suggest longing, loss, or just a simple case of absent-mindedness. Either way, someone kept it. And then your fingers land on something cold. Metal. Cylindrical. You pull it free. It's a scent vial, the kind with a hinged top and a cotton core. This one smells faintly of camphor and orange peel. These vials, often worn on a chain or kept by the bed, were part perfume, part aromatherapy. Their contents ranged from lavender oil to ammonia, depending on whether one needed soothing or reviving. Camphor, for example, was believed to quiet the pulse and encourage drowsiness. But it also doubled as a moth repellent and, in high doses, a neurological irritant. Victorian medicine had a blurry relationship with dosage. Historians still debate whether scent vials were practical tools or social accessories. Were they used sincerely for rest, or just another signal of refinement on a woman's nightstand? Or, as many believe, both. In a culture obsessed with appearances, even unconsciousness needed accessorizing. Beneath the vial, tucked neatly in the corner, is a folded square of heavy paper labeled, "For Rainy Thoughts." Intrigued, you unfold it. Inside is a short poem, handwritten and signed. The lines read, "If you are not sleeping, pretend that you are. Close every door to the day, even if one squeaks." It's not brilliant. It doesn't need to be. It's comfort in 4 lines. Someone wrote this not for art, but for coping. You lay it back down and glance across the drawer, now a map of soft distractions and old remedies. Everything in it feels designed to soothe, distract, or delay that moment when the mind spirals instead of settles. Because sometimes, sleep doesn't arrive when called. Sometimes it needs luring, or bribing, or at least, a convincing impression of readiness. Deeper into the drawer, past sachets and slates, you discover something that crinkles beneath your fingers, a sheaf of pressed, yellowing paper folded into quarters. It's thicker than a letter, too crisp to be napkins, and when you lift it into the lamplight, a faded ink title reveals itself across the top, The Domestic Rules of Repose. This, dear listener, is no ordinary bedtime list. It's a handwritten manifesto on how to prepare oneself for sleep, Victorian style. The writing is precise, looping, with several flourishes too extravagant for practicality. You settle in, eyes scanning the neat guidelines. The first line reads, "One must not go to bed too soon, lest one tempt wakefulness." Already, we're off to a paradoxical start. Victorians had a somewhat adversarial relationship with sleep. It was necessary, yes, but also seen as a moral weakness if indulged in too readily. Sloth, after all, was one of the 7 deadlies. Item 2 instructs the reader to perform 3 minutes of stretching, described as limbering the limbs, with specific movements that sound suspiciously like early yoga poses, but without any spiritual pretense. Reach arms to the heavens, rotate wrists, count 10 breaths inward and outward, as though drawing in the calm and pushing out the clamor. It's oddly poetic, in its own clunky way. Next comes a rule about the temperature of one's bedchamber. Not too warm, for heat excites the mind, nor too chill, for then the blood races. This, at least, tracks with modern sleep science. Victorian bedrooms, especially in wealthier homes, often had fireplaces, but they were rarely left burning overnight. Instead, one might warm the sheets with a ceramic bed warmer filled with hot coals or boiled water, then remove it before sleep commenced. Too much heat was seen as dangerously invigorating. You can imagine someone poking at a thermometer by candlelight, sighing at 64 degrees. One of the more curious suggestions reads, "Turn the pillow at 9:45 p.m., then again at 10:05. Apparently, flipping your pillow was considered not just a comfort tactic, but a kind of sleep hygiene ritual. There's even a scrawled note beside it in another hand, "If still wakeful at 10:30, recite the Latin names of trees." Now there's a lullaby you didn't expect: Quercus, Betula, Salix. Historians still argue whether sleep rules like these were common practice or peculiar eccentricities confined to a certain type of household, the sort that read etiquette books in bed and thought insomnia could be bullied into submission. But a growing body of evidence suggests this kind of sleep scripting was not unusual. Gentle routines, nightly journaling, even pre-sleep letter writing to the dead, these were all part of the private, nightly theater. Which brings us to the next discovery, a sleep mask. Yes, that's right. Tucked beneath the papers is what looks like a miniature blindfold, fashioned from quilted silk and edged with lace. It's lavender in color, once vibrant, now a soft grayish mauve. The strap is missing, but the intention is clear. Though rarely mentioned in popular accounts, sleep masks weren't unknown in the Victorian age. They served the same purpose they do now, blocking out light, creating a tiny, sensory cocoon. And in a time before blackout curtains, that made sense. Cities were growing noisier and brighter. Gas lamps flickered all night. Outside, dogs barked and milk carts clattered down cobbles before dawn. Inside, any flickering candle or firelight might bounce against a mirror and illuminate your ceiling in unsettling shapes. Next to the mask is a peculiar object, a small metal bell, about the size of a walnut, with a ribbon loop tied through its handle. This, oddly enough, was not for summoning a maid. It was a self-bell. Some Victorians believed in marking the moment they awoke during the night, so they'd ring a quiet bell to track interruptions to their rest. Others used it as a ritual, a tiny chime before lying down, to signal the body, as one sleep guide phrased it, that waking tasks are now complete. Sleep as ceremony. Sleep as performance. Your eyes drift across the drawer and catch the edge of a miniature almanac, year 1883. Dog-eared, but intact. On the inside back cover, in pencil, someone has scribbled a chart. Each column is marked, "Slept well, woke once," or "Dreamt oddly." Beside each day, a tidy checkmark or tiny frowny face. It's a sleep tracker, 19th century style. This was someone trying to outwit their insomnia with consistency. Or maybe just giving themselves gold stars for surviving the night. And aren't we still doing the same thing with apps and journals? Among the pages, pressed so flat you almost miss them, are 2 playing cards, both queens. One of hearts. One of spades. No explanation. No note. Just there, as if they were laid to rest and never retrieved. A love letter, a lucky charm, or simply leftovers from a game played while waiting for sleep to arrive. Victorian nights were long, especially for the anxious, the widowed, the young mothers, the overworked clerks with too many unpaid bills. Sometimes, all you had was a drawer full of gentle nonsense and the belief that it might help. Historians still argue whether these rituals truly soothed the soul or merely gave it something to do until sleep eventually won. But the drawer itself, this quiet archive of lavender petals and miniature bells, suggests a deeper truth. Rest is rarely an accident. It's built. It's prepared for. It's invited in, over and over again. At the back corner of the drawer, nestled almost shyly beneath a folded kerchief, your fingers find something cold, ridged, and gently curved. You draw it out carefully and, well, of course. It's a small bottle of laudanum. Unmarked but unmistakable, the glass tinted a smoky amber, its cork stopper sealed with wax that's cracked with age. You're holding one of Victorian England's sleep secrets, a powerful one. Laudanum, a tincture of opium mixed with alcohol, was a staple in countless households. Prescribed for everything from toothaches to coughs to melancholy, it was also commonly taken for a better night's rest, as newspapers of the time so delicately phrased it. And yet, even in the era's most refined circles, the stuff carried a shadow. Its use was widespread, but rarely loudly discussed. A person might confess to using it for a migraine, but never quite admit to taking it for grief or sleeplessness. That would have seemed weak. Or worse, unrestrained. Still, the bottle in your hand isn't full. It's nearly empty. Perhaps the owner used it only on the worst nights, the truly restless ones. Or perhaps it was merely a comfort, the way modern sleepers keep melatonin in the drawer and forget to take it. The real medicine, after all, might have been ritual. Tucked alongside it is something altogether less alarming, a tiny muslin pouch tied with mint green thread. Inside, hops. Dried, crumbled, but still faintly bitter and floral. Victorians often stitched hops into pillows or bundled them into sachets like this. The scent, they claimed, produced dreams of light meadows and dancing bees. Science now shows hops do have a mild sedative effect, though perhaps not strong enough to carry you through a nightmare about overdue rent. You set the pouch aside, and next to it lies a hairbrush. Not the kind you might imagine, this one is travel-sized, the wooden handle darkened with age, the bore bristles slightly bent. It's been used, and used a lot. Engraved in looping script on the back, E. Rawlings. No date. No title. Just a name. Brushing one's hair before bed wasn't simply about tidiness. Victorians often recommended 100 strokes per evening, not only to maintain shine and softness but as a kind of meditative routine. The repetition. The physical sensation. The signal to the brain, we are done now. The day is over. Historians still debate whether this tradition had medical merit or if it was another performative gesture in a society obsessed with appearance. But there's no denying the calming effect of that gentle repetition, bristle meeting scalp, over and over, until your thoughts slow to match the rhythm. Beneath the brush lies a folded note. Yellowed, fragile, sealed with what appears to be old soap residue rather than proper wax. You ease it open. The handwriting is cramped and hurried. Monday. Couldn't sleep. Not even after the second draft. Woke again at 3. Wrote down the cat's dream from last week. Might try cinnamon milk next time. You can't help but smile. Not because of the dream cat, which sounds delightful, but because of the mention of cinnamon milk. Victorians didn't just rely on opiates. They also believed firmly in digestive comfort as the pathway to peaceful sleep. Warm milk infused with cinnamon, nutmeg, or caraway was a popular remedy. Other recipes included barley water, orange flower cordial, or a spoonful of vinegar mixed into warm honeyed water. Yes, vinegar. Sleep, apparently, has never been for the faint of palate. Tucked into the corner of the drawer is something harder to identify at first, a small, round disc wrapped in tissue. When unwrapped, it reveals itself, a tin of pomade. Faintly lemon-scented. Likely for the hair, though some variations were used on lips, temples, even fingertips. Applied before bed not for vanity, but because scent, to the Victorian mind, could soothe the nerves. Which brings you to another object, flat, rectangular, wrapped in silk. You undo the knot, expecting another letter. Instead, it's a page torn from a magazine on the bedtime habits of influential men. The first profile is of Charles Dickens. Apparently, he always slept facing north. Believed it aligned his body's magnetism. Would wake at 3 a.m. and walk the streets if insomnia struck. Then there's Florence Nightingale, yes, included despite the headline. She swore by intense journaling before bed, cataloging every interaction and medical case of her day until her brain emptied. And composer Hector Berlioz, who apparently soothed himself to sleep by reading medical textbooks upside down. Yes, upside down. Historians still argue whether these anecdotes were true, exaggerated, or fabricated entirely to amuse magazine readers. But whether true or not, they inspired imitation. And so, countless Victorians tried similar stunts, hoping some borrowed quirk might cure their own wakefulness. And here you are now, holding the proof. You pause, breathe in the mingled scents, lavender, lemon, old ink, dried hops. This drawer isn't just a container. It's a diary of efforts, of failures, of strange little victories. And beneath it all, a quiet truth lingers. No one really has sleep figured out. Not now. Not then. We all reach for whatever might help. A tincture, a journal, a pillow flip, or the soft scratch of a favorite brush. And just like that, your eyelids start to feel a little heavier. As your hand glides deeper into the velvet-lined drawer, your fingers graze something smooth and square, wrapped in waxed cloth. It crinkles softly as you unfold it, revealing a bundle of bedtime reading. Not a book, exactly. More like pages lovingly clipped from periodicals, carefully folded and secured with a red ribbon. The first is a serialized mystery story from the Strand magazine, an early Sherlock Holmes tale, printed in narrow columns. Right beneath it, a soothing essay from Household Words, a Charles Dickens passion project filled with domestic philosophy and gentle moral tales. And then, an article that immediately makes you grin, on the digestive qualities of bedtime toast. Yes, Victorian bedtime reading wasn't always lofty or spiritual. Sometimes it was just toast discourse. A quiet joy wrapped in yeast and butter. You scan the article, and sure enough, it insists that a thin slice of toasted bread, left to cool slightly, affords the stomach a most agreeable settling sensation. No peanut butter. No Nutella. Just honesty and carbs. The owner of this drawer clearly enjoyed a bit of light reading before sleep. The practice was more than distraction, it was tradition. Many Victorians kept a bedside tract or a serialized novel near the nightstand. Paper was relatively cheap, literacy was climbing, and publishers churned out content faster than people could nod off reading it. Historians still argue whether the popularity of these bedtime essays reflected genuine interest or just clever marketing from publishers desperate to stretch subscriptions. You shuffle to the next folded page. This one is handwritten. It's a poem, simple, earnest, amateur, possibly original. It begins. To sleep I plead, though sleep does stall, when moonlight paints the bedroom wall. I count the cracks, I count the seams, and fall at last to pillow dreams. It's unsigned. No date. But you can picture the author, perhaps our drawer's keeper, lying in bed, pen in hand, composing verse to slow the spiraling thoughts. Below it lies a single loose photograph. Sepia-toned. A bedroom, plainly furnished. The wallpaper patterned with small roses. There's the bed, modest, covered in a heavy quilt. And on the nightstand, unmistakable, is this very drawer. There's something intimate about that image. The mundane framed with care. The drawer, open just an inch. Perhaps a gentle warning. Here lie things not for display, but for comfort. This was their quiet place. And then, hidden behind the stack, you find what looks like a pamphlet. No ribbon. Just wedged in at an angle. Its cover reads, A Guide to Proper Sleep Positioning for the Anxious Body. You smirk. Some struggles, it seems, are eternal. Inside, diagrams of ideal sleeping postures. The reposed reformer involves sleeping on your left side with a thin book placed between the knees. The upright widow calls for 2 stacked pillows behind the back and a lavender poultice across the chest. And of course, the distracted philosopher, which simply instructs, lie on your front, turn your head to the wall, and remain very still until overcome. You don't need a historian to tell you, These were all just best guesses. But it's comforting, somehow, to know the Victorians were as unsure about sleeping positions as the rest of us are now. At the very bottom of the bundle, you find a bookmark. Leather. Embossed with a floral border. The word stillness carved into its center in fading gold leaf. One corner is singed, as if it briefly brushed a candle flame. You slide it back into the mystery story and wonder if it's ever been finished. If the killer was ever caught. Or if the reader, lulled by crackling candlelight and the comforting scent of hops and lemon pomade, simply drifted off mid-sentence. And tucked beneath it all, almost missed, is a crumbling envelope. Empty, but once sealed with a pressed violet. Only the brittle petals remain, flattened and dry. You lift the envelope to your nose. Nothing lingers. But in its silence, it tells you something more profound. That scent, like sleep, is fleeting. In this drawer, each object, the poem, the bookmark, even the toast essay, tells a quiet bedtime story. Not one written for fame or even remembrance. Just for release. For softness. For a brief, still hour between wakefulness and the long dark of night. You place everything back just as you found it. The waxed cloth wraps easily. The ribbon ties itself, almost out of habit. And the drawer, once again, holds its secrets close. You linger beside the drawer, fingertips now brushing the inner corner, where the lining gives way slightly to reveal a shallow compartment, barely wide enough to slip your hand through. Nestled within is a fabric pouch, soft and heavy, like it's filled with seeds or small stones. You draw it out. The pouch, stitched from faded muslin, gives a tiny puff of fragrance when squeezed, lavender and chamomile, maybe a hint of valerian. A sleep sachet. Hand-sewn, with the uneven thread of someone learning, or perhaps unlearning, the art of perfection. Victorians were remarkably devoted to scent as a pathway to rest. In a world before white noise machines and melatonin gummies, they leaned on herbs. Herbal pillows and sleep sachets were tucked beneath linens, slipped into drawers, or tied around the bedpost. Some households even suspended muslin bundles above the bed so the air could gently pass through them, releasing just enough aroma to coax the brain toward stillness. You hold the pouch to your cheek. It's cool at first. Then the warmth of your skin reactivates the sleepy bouquet within. Not overwhelming. Just a whisper of garden dusk. Historians still argue whether these herbs actually induced sleep or simply provided a psychological cue, a nightly ritual that trained the mind to slow. But in either case, they worked. Or, at least, people believed they did. And belief, as any insomniac will tell you, is half the battle. You examine the pouch's stitching again and notice something odd, symbols embroidered faintly at the corners. Tiny stars. A moon. And what looks like the letter C. Or maybe a sickle. You're not quite sure. A superstition. A charm. Or just the doodles of someone with a needle and too many thoughts. Next to the pouch in the compartment lies a flat object, wrapped in oiled paper. You carefully peel it open to reveal a pressed bundle of bay leaves tied with twine. Not for cooking, too brittle. More likely for dreams. In some folk traditions, bay was believed to invite prophetic sleep or protect the sleeper from nightmares. Beneath the leaves is a tiny folded card with barely legible handwriting. Place by the heart, never by the head. You can't help but chuckle. Very specific advice. Maybe it worked. Or maybe it was just enough to convince the brain to let go. Placebo by moonlight. The more you explore this drawer, the more it feels like part apothecary, part diary. A record of one person's nightly negotiations with rest. You imagine them, undressing by candlelight, folding their clothes neatly at the foot of the bed, then opening this drawer like a ritual. Selecting their sleep scent for the night. Tucking the card away. Whispering a rhyme to themselves, perhaps, before laying down. Some Victorians believed in sleep charms, amulets or items placed under the pillow to ward off the night air, or the dreaded bad humors believed to enter through open mouths. Others simply craved something to hold. An anchor in the dark. You spot something else, a ceramic token no larger than a coin. Its surface is painted with tiny daisies, and on the back, the word, soon. Just that. Soon. It's not chipped or cracked, which suggests it wasn't just tossed in. It was kept carefully. Maybe a promise, of sleep, of morning, of better days. Soon, is the kind of word that calms you when nothing else can. And now, to your quiet surprise, a snatch of verse floats into your mind. Was it from one of the papers? Or was it just carried by the lavender? In drawers of dusk, where comforts keep, we stitch the edges of our sleep. The items in this compartment don't scream for attention. They murmur. They nudge. They tell the kind of stories that don't end in resolutions, but in deep sighs and shut eyes. And tucked beneath the herb pouch, a last oddity, a tiny spoon carved from bone, with a notch in the handle. It's smooth, obviously used, and clearly out of place here. But next to it is a crumpled paper twist. Unraveled, it reveals white powder. Probably powdered hops or valerian, once used as an herbal sedative. Nothing illicit, just old-school pharmacy. Victorians often turned to sleep mixtures, sometimes herbal, sometimes downright alarming in content. Chloral hydrate. Laudanum. Soothing syrups, with enough opiates to silence not just babies but their parents too. But here, it seems, someone preferred the gentler route. That little spoon, was it dipped into the powder before bed? Stirred into milk? Or slipped beneath the tongue while whispering, "Soon?" You return everything carefully. The pouch, the card, the ceramic token, the spoon, as if disturbing the order would ruffle the very sleep it once summoned. And before you close the compartment, you pause for a final breath of lavender, sweeter now, richer for having shared its secrets. In this drawer, sleep is not taken. It's coaxed. It's brewed and bundled and written on scraps of card in trembling ink. It is stitched into sachets and hidden beneath herbs. It is earned. You close the drawer softly, as if to say, not yet, but soon. The drawer, now gently closed, holds its secrets once more, but you're not quite finished. There's one final place to check, the narrow slot behind the drawer itself. You slide your fingers along the woodwork, feeling for give, and find just enough space to pry loose a folded cloth envelope, yellowed with age and held together by a velvet ribbon. It's soft in your hands, dust clinging to the corners. Someone clearly meant for it to be hidden. A keepsake, perhaps. Or something with a more private story to tell. Inside the envelope is a small stack of folded pages. Not diaries exactly, more like night notes. Lists. Scraps. Fragments. You spread them out on the bed, carefully, like laying out puzzle pieces from someone else's dreams. The first sheet is labeled, in careful script, "Things that help me sleep." A numbered list follows. Milk with nutmeg. Counting backwards from 500. Whispering, "I'm safe," until the words stop meaning anything. Rubbing my wrists with lemon balm. That old lullaby about the barley field. It's less a guide than a confession. Part recipe, part plea. You can feel the ache in the list, not just the longing for sleep, but the work of it. The rituals turned superstition. The ordinary turned sacred. Item number 7 simply reads, "Sleeping in someone else's bed, but only the first night." That one makes you smile. It's oddly specific, and oddly relatable. A second page holds what seems to be a prayer, though it's addressed to whomever keeps watch at 3 a.m. It reads like poetry. "I have closed all shutters, I have stilled all clocks. Let the cat dream of birds and the floorboards be kind. Spare me the thoughts that multiply. Unsnarl the hours. Untangle the dark." There's a smudge where a thumb held the page too tightly. Maybe they whispered it aloud. Maybe they read it until it wore through. Either way, it worked its way into the drawer like everything else, a tool for sleep, crafted from words. Victorians were not immune to anxiety. They just didn't always call it that. Nervous conditions, melancholic vapors, delicate constitutions, euphemisms wrapped around the same late-night spiral. And in response, a culture emerged around managing sleep as both a physical and moral good. Historians still argue whether these nightly habits were forms of early self-care or merely reflections of a repressed society. Was the Victorian obsession with routine a form of control or surrender? The third page, shorter than the rest, contains only 4 words, "Try not to vanish." No context. Just that. A quiet plea. Maybe written after a death, or during illness. Maybe it was a joke between friends, the kind that turns somber after midnight. Or maybe it was just what it looks like, something to cling to when the world goes too quiet. You pause, letting the rhythm of your breathing fill the silence. The papers still warm from your hand. And in this moment, the note feels less like something written long ago and more like something handed to you just now. A passing of the torch, from one sleepless soul to another. As you gather the pages, a final one catches your eye. It's written in a Messier hand, more rushed, more emotional. Ink blotched in one corner. The first sentence is underlined twice. If I vanish, look in the drawer. You freeze. Of course, you're already here. But now the drawer seems heavier, more intimate. Less about sleep and more about survival. These weren't just bedtime aids. They were artifacts of someone wrestling with night after night, trying not to disappear into the spaces between hours. Victorian sleep culture, for all its primness, had this thread of real desperation running through it. The fear of going to bed and not waking. Or worse, waking into the same dread again. And so people made tools, built altars in wood and paper and scent, to stave it off. You slide the papers back into the cloth envelope and replace it behind the drawer. Not because you want to forget, but because it feels right. Like returning borrowed things. The drawer no longer feels like just a place for nightcaps and candles. It's a vessel. A journal. A time capsule of someone who understood that sleep, in all its vulnerability, needed armor. And maybe that's why they labeled the final note, in case of unquiet. Not fear. Not madness. Just unquiet. A word that sits between insomnia and restlessness, between wakefulness and worry. A word that leaves room for softness. You exhale slowly, the room quieter now. Or maybe it's you. The drawer, slightly ajar, seems to sigh with you. Somewhere outside, a clock chimes. 2 o'clock. The hour when things feel furthest from morning. The hour when your mind would usually start circling the drain. But not tonight. Tonight, you know what's in the drawer. You've seen it. Felt it. Read the words meant for no one, and maybe also for you. You get the feeling that whoever assembled these sleep tools didn't expect anyone else to see them. And yet, they left them tidy. Ready. Not in despair. But in trust. You close the slot gently. Let it settle back into the frame. And for the first time tonight, your hands are empty. You lean back now, resting your head against the headboard. The drawer is closed, the envelope returned, but your mind still drifts, floating somewhere between curiosity and calm. There's something deeply soothing about uncovering someone else's nighttime rituals. Like finding an old friend through the layers of time. But the story of the Victorian sleep drawer doesn't end with herbs, notes, or sleep stones. No, there's one more layer you hadn't noticed before. You slide your fingers along the edge of the nightstand and find a thin seam, barely visible in the candlelight. A hidden compartment, tucked below the drawer's base. With a careful tug, it clicks open. And inside, a narrow, leather-bound book, its spine worn smooth. It isn't a diary. Not exactly. More like a private ledger, page after page listing dates, moon phases, barometric pressure, and sleep quality. Restless. Fitful. Dreamless. Woke with headache. Slept through till dawn. It's the kind of meticulous tracking you might expect from a scientist. Or a very tired person hoping to outsmart their own brain. You read one entry aloud, just a whisper. January 3rd. Rain tapping on window. Cold toes. Tea with valerian. Slept 6 hours. Dreamt of snow on summer grass. It's beautiful in its mundanity. And somehow more relatable than any grand diary of events. This is a record of how a human coped, with moonlight, teacups, and rituals. One night at a time. And it reflects a wider truth about Victorian culture, the obsession with classification. From Beatles to dreams, everything was recorded, organized, filed. Even the things that defied explanation, like sleep. Historians still argue whether this need to catalog dreams and sleep disturbances was driven by genuine curiosity or a deeper anxiety about the unknown. After all, sleep remained one of the few human functions still wrapped in mystery, and mystery, in a world ruled by steam and reason, was deeply unsettling. You flip forward and find a page marked with a scrap of ribbon. The handwriting has changed, smaller, shakier. April 14th. No sleep. Thunder. Tried every charm. Still awake. Still awake. There's no commentary. Just repetition. The kind of note someone might write just to prove they still exist. Still aware. Still trying. Another entry, a few nights later, is more hopeful. April 17th. First full night in weeks. Warm brick at feet helped. And the lavender. You can almost feel their relief. That mix of pride and disbelief when something finally works. The moment you realize that yes, you did sleep. Even if it won't last, even if you can't control it, for one night, the system held. The final pages become even more sparse. Short lines. Fewer words. May 2nd. Sleep. May 3rd. Dreams. May 4th. Nothing to report. You close the book gently, like tucking in a child. There's nothing else in the compartment, just the smell of old leather and dust. It hits you then, the quiet heroism in these pages. Whoever kept this book wasn't chasing productivity or performance. They weren't optimizing sleep for a better morning routine. They were documenting survival, chronicling the nightly battle against the ticking clock, the anxious pulse, the unquiet. And they were far from alone. Victorian society was filled with people quietly struggling to rest. And entire cottage industries rose to meet their needs. Sleep tinctures, opiate-laced tonics, special mattresses, hypnotic reading books, even bedtime sermons broadcast through early phonograph recordings. You glance around the room and imagine it, a sound machine powered by gears and steam, whispering verses in a soft monotone. Or perhaps a phonograph needle clicking softly through a well-worn lullaby, the kind meant to soothe both child and adult alike. They didn't have blue light filters or mindfulness apps. But they had drawers, books, candles, and the deep, unshakable belief that sleep could be coaxed, like a nervous cat, if only you followed the right steps. You place the book back, not quite willing to let go of its quiet company. Then you slide the hidden compartment closed, sealing the past again. The drawer looks unchanged. Ordinary. But now you know better. It held not just herbs and notes, but the echo of someone else's heartbeat at midnight. Someone who counted the days, who tracked the weather, who whispered poems to the ceiling and hoped for stillness. You wonder if they ever found it. And you wonder, maybe, if we're all just variations of that same night wanderer. Scribbling notes in the dark. Lighting candles against the shadows. Trying, again and again, to make peace with the dark. You shift your weight slightly on the bed, as though making room for the past to sit beside you. The drawer, the book, the soft traces of someone else's restless nights, they've cast a spell over the room. But there's one object you haven't quite examined yet. It's propped delicately against the back corner of the drawer, almost blending into the wood, a small framed card, like a calling card but thicker, with gold leaf trim and elegantly embossed type. The top reads, "The Somnambulist's Almanac, a month of nightly preparations." Now that's a title you can't ignore. You pick it up and feel the surprising weight of the card, thick cardstock, like a tiny book compressed into a single object. On the back, a series of 31 tiny boxes, one for each night of the month. Each square contains a single, curious instruction. Tonight's square reads, Night 14, press an iron key to your wrist before sleep. You blink. Did they really believe this helped? Did it ever work? Historians still debate whether such sleep almanacs were serious guides or more of a whimsical indulgence, passed among friends for amusement. Some almanacs from the era combined traditional herbal remedies with utterly bizarre suggestions, counting backwards from 500 while drinking warm milk, whispering Latin phrases into your pillow, or placing a fig under your tongue to suppress nightmares. And then there were the dream incubators, rituals meant not just to induce sleep, but to control its contents. Tonight's drawer owner, it seems, had tried them all. Several squares have tiny check marks beside them, some faded, others strong. You trace over a few of them. Night 3, leave an apple core on the sill. Night 8, sleep with one shoe facing east. Night 12, recite your full name 3 times into a mirror. It's oddly comforting, this collection of tiny tasks. Like little anchors for a drifting mind. You can picture it now, turning down the bed, striking a match for the lamp, consulting your almanac like a priest at an altar. Each act a prayer for sleep. And while we may roll our eyes at some of these rituals today, were they really so different from modern habits? Weighted blankets. Aromatherapy diffusers. YouTube playlists of rainforest loops. The soft tyranny of sleep-tracking apps that ding you for waking at 3:07 a.m. Victorians simply dressed their anxiety in poetry and folklore. A brass key against the wrist was no less symbolic than a smartwatch buzzing on your skin. It's worth noting that many of these sleep rituals were passed down matrilineally. Mothers teaching daughters how to properly end a day, when to draw the drapes, how to fold one's nightgown, which herbs to brew for that tight, chesty panic that strikes just as the house goes quiet. There's a theory, unproven but compelling, that these almanacs were especially popular among single women and widows, who bore the brunt of nighttime solitude. Without the rhythmic snoring of a bedmate or the comforting chaos of a family under one roof, silence becomes a weight. And so they filled it, with lavender, chants, pressed flowers, and tiny rituals that reminded them, you are not alone. You are not forgotten. You are part of a long, strange tradition of humans trying to soothe themselves to sleep. Back to the almanac. One square stands out among the others. It's boxed in red ink and reads, Night 21, do nothing. No tea. No charms. No books. Just rest. How radical. In a culture obsessed with activity, even bedtime activity, doing nothing might have felt like the most rebellious act of all. You can almost hear the voice of the drawer's owner, gently closing the book, blowing out the candle, whispering into the dark, enough. Because eventually, every almanac ends. Every drawer empties. Every restless soul must surrender, if only for a few hours. You place the card gently back where it was, resisting the urge to keep it. Not everything needs to be taken to be remembered. Outside, the rain begins again, just a whisper against the glass. You wonder how many times they sat here, listening to that same sound, waiting for their eyelids to grow heavy. How many nights they pressed a brass key to their wrist and hoped for a dream of flying, or floating, or nothing at all. And you wonder, again, how many of their rituals are not so different from yours. How, even now, you are tracing your own sleep almanac. Tonight's entry, listen to a stranger tell a story about old furniture. Your gaze lingers on the drawer a moment longer, but something draws your eyes away, to the tabletop just above it. There, covered in a fine patina of age, lies a forgotten object, overlooked until now. It's small and round, about the size of a plum. You lift it carefully and discover that it's a velvet-covered pincushion in the shape of a crescent moon. Why, of course, how very Victorian. This wasn't merely a place to store stray pins. No, in this case, the object reveals more. Embedded in the velvet are dozens of tiny scraps of thread, blue, ivory, and a striking garnet red. There's even a faint, dusty scent, lavender, perhaps, mixed with the brittle sharpness of old fabric. Historians still argue whether sleep sewing was common practice or an eccentric pastime, but evidence suggests that some Victorian women would keep minor mending or embroidery work near the bed, not as a chore, but as a wind-down ritual. Stitching a hem. Reinforcing a button. Adding a flourish to a nightdress sleeve. The theory was this: a few minutes of quiet handiwork would soothe the mind, ease fidgeting fingers, and draw the nervous energy of the day into the steady rhythm of thread and needle. It makes sense. There's something deeply meditative about the act. Push, pull, loop. Push, pull, loop. Your breath naturally slows to match. And let's not forget the romantic flair, literally stitching love tokens in secret, initials hidden beneath seams, or tiny symbols known only to the wearer and the one who embroidered them. One known example, found in a Yorkshire archive, reads, "You rest so I may sleep." The message was sewn into the collar of a husband's nightshirt, an inside joke between two chronic insomniacs. But this crescent moon pincushion suggests something gentler, more whimsical. You picture a woman, our anonymous drawer owner, seated under soft lamplight, adding tiny silver stars to a velvet handkerchief while the wind sighs outside. The idea of a dream cloth was fashionable for a time. Delicate squares of linen embroidered with moon phases, pressed flowers, or personal mantras. Some were stuffed with herbs and tucked beneath pillows. Others were hung on bedposts, a visual anchor for a weary mind to fixate on in the dark. You turn the pincushion over and notice something unexpected, faint words stitched along the edge in faded silk thread. You squint. To mend what the day has torn. That lands somewhere deeper than expected. Not just a quip about fabric, but perhaps a philosophy. A belief that the quiet rituals of night, whether threading a needle or steeping a tea, were a chance to repair not just garments, but oneself. Frayed thoughts, worn tempers, torn resolve. You place the pincushion down, softly now, with reverence. Its presence feels tender somehow, like someone left you a bedtime benediction across the centuries. It reminds you that sleep wasn't always about escaping the day. Sometimes, it was about reweaving its threads into something stronger, one stitch at a time. And here's something odd. Tucked under the pincushion is a thimble. But not the standard pewter kind. This one is carved from bone, with intricate floral etchings worn smooth at the edges. Likely handmade, possibly gifted. Objects like this were often personalized, monograms etched inside, or tiny inlaid stones. It was believed, in some circles, that a bone thimble helped draw out the lingering heat from restless hands. Folk medicine, sure, but also a pretty poetic way to describe anxiety. It makes you think, what are the objects on your own nightstand? A phone, a glass of water, that one weird lip balm you swear by but can't pronounce. Functional, yes. But do they comfort? The Victorians, for all their lace and superstition, understood that bedtime was its own ceremony. Not a hasty collapse into unconsciousness, but a curated winding down. A slow descent. There's a phrase that shows up in several Victorian sleep journals, to tuck in the soul. As if each night, sleep was a sending off. A journey not just through dreams, but through something more liminal. Something sacred. You look around this imagined room and realize just how many tools our drawer's owner gathered to aid their descent. Potions and pincushions, lists and lullabies. And how each one, in its own way, was a small lantern in the dark. The old floorboard creaks softly, and for a second, you think you hear footsteps. But it's only your imagination, stirred by the hour, softened by story. Still, you wonder who else once paused here, beneath this lamplight, needle in hand, thoughts adrift. Did they ever finish their stitching? Did they fall asleep mid-seam, the needle slipping to the floor? Did their dreams carry them someplace better? You pick up the pincushion one last time. It's heavier now, not in weight, but in presence. A symbol of care. Of tending to things quietly, nightly, patiently. And as you set it down, it occurs to you that maybe mending was never just about making things whole. Maybe it was about making peace with what will never be. You lean back slightly now, imagining the hush of the room. The lamp flickers, casting soft shadows along the contours of the drawer. As your hand returns to explore, your fingers brush something cool, flat, and metallic. You draw it out slowly, a small, delicate key on a faded ribbon. It's not for a door. This is something more intimate. You follow the ribbon, tugging gently, and out comes a slender diary, its cover faded green, embossed with faint floral motifs. The brass clasp clicks open with a whisper, and you leaf through brittle pages edged in pink. Not a diary, exactly. A dream book. Victorians were famously obsessed with dreams, not just the fluffy kind with floating clouds and flying kittens, but full-on symbolic interpretation. There were entire manuals written on the subject, some blending Christian allegory, ancient Greek philosophy, and frankly, utter nonsense. Historians still argue whether these manuals were actually taken seriously or simply passed around like Victorian horoscopes at tea parties. Either way, they were popular enough to fill bookshop shelves for decades. And what you hold here appears to be a homemade version, half journal, half codebook. Some entries are straightforward. Dreamed of water in glass bowl. Felt prepared for the day. Others are more cryptic. White horse in alleyway again. Galloped away as I reached. Then, off to the side in tiny script, to dream of white horse equals approaching news, uncertain nature. You smile. It's a bit like finding someone's old Google search history. Only instead of WebMD panic spirals, it's full of snakes, flowers, and mysterious strangers in foggy parks. There's something comforting in how universal dream motifs seem to be. Fish swimming backward, forgotten doorways, teeth falling out. Centuries may pass, but the subconscious keeps playing its little tricks. And here's a quirky twist. Some dream guides of the period actually recommended placing a small notebook under your pillow to catch dreams before they fled. A kind of psychological butterfly net. Your drawer keeper appears to have tried this. Several of the pages are crinkled at the edges, marked with smudged pencil lines and ink blots, likely scribbled in the middle of the night, before lucidity returned. You read on. Dreamed I was climbing endless stairs with no top. Woke breathless. A woman with no face offered me honey in a glass spoon. A chill brushes your neck at that one. Not from fear, just the eerie tenderness of it. You can almost picture the faceless woman. Can almost taste the honey. Some Victorians believed dreams were visitations, not just metaphors or fragments of memory, but actual messages from beyond. Others thought they were the mind's way of digesting daily chaos, like a cow chewing cud in its sleep. Somewhere between superstition and science, people found comfort in cataloging these nighttime scenes. Much like today, perhaps, it's less about solving the dream and more about honoring it. Acknowledging that your brain, even at rest, has stories it wants to tell. You flip to the last pages of the book and find a pressed violet between the parchment. Still faintly purple, its petals delicate and curled. No annotation, just silence. Maybe it meant something. Maybe it didn't. The charm is in the mystery. Also inside the drawer is a folded scrap of newspaper, a clipping titled, "The Sleep Cure, Dreams as Diagnostics." It references a now-lost Victorian trend in which amateur physicians believed that repeated dreams of water indicated kidney issues, while floating sensation dreams were linked to anemia. The medical establishment of the time, of course, mostly scoffed. But that didn't stop local almanacs from publishing dream body charts like, "What Your Nightmare Says About Your Liver." You imagine a Victorian mum flipping through one by candlelight, muttering, "Well, that explains the frogs again." This interplay between dreams and the body fascinated people. Some even believed sleeping in a specific posture, say on your left side, legs curled toward the chest, would encourage gentler dreams. Others advocated for dream incubation, placing symbols, a rose, a miniature harp, a crucifix, under the pillow to nudge the subconscious in a chosen direction. You glance again at the small dream diary, its pages fragile and ink faded, but alive with meaning. Not because of what each symbol stood for, but because someone once believed they mattered. And maybe they did. Because in a world without television or podcasts or ASMR playlists, your dreams were your nightly entertainment, therapy session, and cosmic weather report all rolled into one. And now, here you are, more than a century later, flipping through another's inner theater. Quietly, respectfully, you return the book to its spot, tucking the violet carefully inside. And you wonder, what dreams will you collect tonight? You pause, taking a slow breath as your hand drifts back into the velvet-lined drawer, fingertips brushing the grain of its wooden edge. Something shifts beneath your touch, a series of folded papers, carefully pressed and stacked. You lift them, feeling the papery softness of age, the slight must of lavender and ink. They're letters. Dozens, maybe more. Not love letters, though. They're addressed in a firm, spidery script to the Honorable Dr. Whittington, Royal Society of Somnology, which, you'll be surprised to learn, was a real short-lived Victorian institution. Well, semi-real. It was more of a gentleman's society of interest than a functioning laboratory, think chess club, but for dreams. The envelope seal is unbroken on one letter, but the others have been read and reread, folded and smoothed and folded again. They reveal a correspondence between two amateur sleep enthusiasts. Think Reddit thread, but with fountain pens and very slow replies. One letter reads, "Dear Doctor, another curious episode last night. I awoke at the hour of 3 to find myself still clutching a candle, which I had dreamt of lighting in a chamber full of clocks. Is this not peculiar? I await your esteemed thoughts." The reply, preserved on faded onion skin paper, begins. "Esteemed sir, the clocks may symbolize the ceaseless march of time, or perhaps a latent worry about your joints." You can't help but smile. The tone is serious, but the content? Gently unhinged in the most delightful way. It's comforting to think people once took their sleep this seriously, not with apps or supplements, but with the deep, slow attention of a letter penned by gaslight. In another exchange, your drawer's previous owner describes crafting a dream sachet, a tiny pillow filled with hops, dried roses, and mugwort, sewn by hand and slipped beneath their mattress. Mugwort, by the way, was believed to enhance vivid dreams and even open the gates to lucid dreaming. Historians still argue whether this was genuine folk knowledge or clever Victorian marketing. New, improved dreams with real herbal clarity. Of course, the Victorians weren't the only ones keen on this kind of nighttime tinkering. Sleep practices stretch back millennia. Ancient Egyptians left carved dream beds in temple ruins, and the Greeks used incense in their sleep chambers to curry favor with Hypnos, the god of sleep. But what's unique about the Victorian sleep drawer, this quiet little tradition, is that it wasn't about seeking prophecy or curing disease. It was about control. Amid the chaos of industrial life, trains, telegrams, street gaslights, the drawer offered a return to something personal. A space where sleep could be prepared, even curated. You imagine the drawer's owner smoothing the sachet beneath their pillow, placing their key and diary just so, winding a pocket watch to tick steadily through the night. You imagine them taking comfort in these small rituals, these symbols of readiness. Because really, what is sleep but surrender? And surrender is easier when you've planned for it. In one of the later letters, written in shakier script, the correspondent writes, "The dreams are gentler now. Less of the staircases and more of the apple orchard. I find myself rested, and even, at times, restored. There's something so tender in that. The idea that dreams can shift with age, becoming less frantic, more forgiving. A lifetime of thoughts slowly sorting themselves out, like papers rearranging in a breeze. Your drawer is nearly empty now. Only one item remains. It's a glove. Just one, right hand. Kid leather, pale cream, softened by decades. At first, it seems out of place. But when you lift it, something small and metallic clinks inside. You shake the glove gently, and out falls a tiny brass bell, no bigger than a thimble. You hold it to your ear and give it the lightest tap. It lets out a note so faint, so fragile, it's almost imaginary. There are references in one of the letters to bell tokens, little charms used by some Victorian dreamers as protective objects. They'd be placed near the bed or tucked under a mattress to ward off sleep paralysis, night terrors, or what they called the visitations. Yes, those visitations, the belief that ghosts, demons, or even your own double might come to sit on your chest and watch you sleep. The bell was a ward, a tiny clang of warning if the spirit world came too close. Did it work? Hard to say. But you find comfort in it nonetheless. You tuck the bell back into the glove and return it gently to the drawer. Everything's in its place again, the dream diary, the sachet, the letters, the key. And suddenly, the drawer doesn't feel so strange or eerie. It feels like a memory box. A place where one quiet Victorian soul tried, night after night, to make peace with the unknown world of sleep. The drawer isn't just a collection of items. It's a map of someone's efforts to rest. And now, in the dim light of your own room, maybe you'll make one too. You close the drawer with a soft push, the sound of aged wood sliding home more soothing than it has any right to be. The room around you fades again into that gentle hush, that place between past and present, where time seems to pause. And as the memory of the drawer lingers, another story quietly unfurls, one that isn't tucked inside, but laid out all around it. You begin to picture the person who once opened that drawer nightly, who smoothed out those letters and straightened those gloves. Let's build them together, piece by piece. They likely lived in a narrow London row house, with gas sconces flickering along the staircase and coal smoke curling from the hearth. Their bedroom would have been compact, with a washstand by the window and a goose-feather mattress rustling beneath linen sheets. Outside, the city clattered endlessly, horseshoes on cobbles, milkmen calling out, the occasional screech of a train whistle miles away. Inside, though, was ritual. Every night, they wound a pocket watch and placed it face up by the pillow. They brushed their hair with a boar bristle brush, each stroke counted. They laid out a linen nightshirt, perhaps mended at the elbow, softened by years of washing. And then came the drawer, each item laid like a spell, each gesture a quiet invitation to sleep. It's funny to think how much effort Victorians put into bedtime. Sleep hygiene, they'd call it today. But for them, it was almost sacred. Even with all their bodily anxieties and spiritual fears, they believed sleep could be made beautiful, predictable, soft. Of course, it didn't always work. One tucked-away document you found earlier describes an unusual remedy. Apply goose grease mixed with poppy seed oil to soles of feet. Wrap in flannel. Take 3 drops of laudanum. Historians still debate whether this was a real treatment or more folk myth, but let's be honest, you try anything after 3 nights of tossing and turning. Some letters hint at more curious sleep experiments. One dreamer apparently drank hot beer mixed with raw egg and nutmeg before bed. Another claimed that turning one's pillow 3 times in succession, east, north, west, aligned the mind with the planetary ether. You can't help but think of that as the Victorian version of airplane mode. Among these quirks was the belief in sleep postures. Side sleeping was preferred, back sleeping was risky, remember the visitations, and stomach sleeping? Well, that was simply unladylike. You're probably thinking, how did they even sleep with corsets and nightcaps and chamber pots nearby? Slowly, quietly, with the weight of the day folded into a drawer. There's a tenderness to all this, isn't there? In the candlelit world of the 1800s, sleep wasn't just a necessity. It was a practice. And the drawer was their little altar to it. Some of the artifacts you've seen tonight, like the bell or the sachet, might seem quaint, even silly. But others, like the handwritten logs of waking dreams or the tucked-away photos of loved ones, still echo with feeling. One sepia portrait in the drawer showed a woman sitting beside a bed, holding a book in her lap, half smiling. It's hard not to imagine that she once read aloud until the listener's eyes drifted shut. And in some ways, that's what you've just been doing too. Sleep, after all, is one of the few things every person throughout history has in common. Kings and cooks, tailors and teachers, we all eventually lie down and hand over the reins to the unknown. You lean back now, closing your own eyes, letting the image of that Victorian drawer settle in your mind. The drawer with its tiny brass bell, its sachets and notes, its artifacts of nighttime care. You feel a little closer to someone long gone, someone whose name might be lost to time but whose dreams, oddly enough, are not. Their drawer was their signal to the world. I need rest. I am preparing for dreams. I deserve softness, too. And maybe tonight, you'll open your own invisible drawer. Place something small and meaningful inside. A thought. A wish. A memory. Then close it gently, just like they did. Sleep well, friend. And now, as the last pages of this quiet journey flutter closed, let the atmosphere soften even more. The sounds of history grow faint. No more carriage wheels or ticking clocks, no creak of old drawer wood or flutter of antique papers. Just the hush. Your breathing has slowed, and your body knows it's time to settle into stillness. Let your shoulders sink deeper into the mattress. Let your jaw unclench. Let the space around you become softer, wider, dimmer. Picture the final image, a drawer closed, the last candle flickering out. The room draped in velvety night. Outside, the quietest London rain begins to fall, pattering lightly against the windowpane. Each drop a lullaby from another century. Whatever you carried today can wait until morning. Whatever question tugged at your thoughts has been gently placed beside a sachet of lavender and a folded pair of gloves, tucked away, just for now. You are allowed this stillness, this breath, this pause. Sleep doesn't ask for perfection, it only asks for space. For quiet. For the softness you've just created. A Victorian drawer might seem old-fashioned, but the idea behind it isn't. Make bedtime something worth looking forward to. Something that cares for you back. So sink a little deeper. Drift a little slower. The past is quiet now. The present is gentle. The future can wait. You've done enough. You've heard enough. And now, all that's left is to dream.